Shavua Tov. We're learning the Otzer HaIyunim, and we're up to page Pei Vav, and we're discussing the Ran. The Ran has a problem since we have a Safek, which of the two sets of the kosos require a HeSeiba, and the Gemara concludes therefore that will require a HeSeiba on all four kosos. And the Ran is bothered because of the principle of Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula, and he has a comparison to the case of a city, and we don't know if it's walled. It was walled at the time of Yoshua or not, so we're not sure whether to read the Megillah on the 14th or the 15th, and therefore will require that we read the Megillah on both the 14th and the 15th. And once again, we suspend the halacha of Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. And the Ran offers an interpretation to the effect that we cannot be oker the takana completely by applying Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula and end up without any HeSeiba on any of the four kosos, and likewise to not require Kriyas HaMegillah on any of the 2 days, and we end up with a city that doesn't read the Megillah at all. So in those cases where applying Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula would be oker and completely nullify the original takana, then we suspend the principle of Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. And we had a long discussion, if you may recall, about the Mishnah L'Melech. And the Mishnah L'Melech says that when the Safek is in the Takanas Chachamim in general, like for example HeSeiba, so we're attacking the entire the entire entity of the Takana regarding Daled Kosos HeSeiba, then we're going to suspend the principle of Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. Why? Because mispateles hatakana legamri. But when we have questions about the specifics, then we do apply Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. And then he's stuck with Megillah, because in Megillah, we're not saying that because of those cities that are in Safek, we don't know whether they read the Megillah on the 14th or 15th, that we're attacking the very takana and undermining the takana of Megillah. So therefore, the principle of Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula should apply. But he says the following, that since there are a number of cities that are in Safek as to whether or not they should read on the 14th or the 15th, then therefore, Haklal shel Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula eino poter osam legamri. So with regard to that cluster of cities that have the same common profile of Safek, we're going to take one of the two tzaddim of the Safek, and we're going to accept that that is when the Kriya should take place. And therefore, the Mishnah Mel comes to the conclusion that in those Sfekis, those cities that are in doubt, they will in fact read the Megillah on the 14th rather than the 15th. And once having read the Megillah on the 14th, based on that minhag, they can apply Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula to the 15th of Chodesh Adar. Now we're up to the Baruch Tam, which is the second paragraph on page Pei Vav, Os Gimel. The Baruch Tam, who came from a very illustrious family of Chachamim, his name was Baruch Frankel Ta'omin, same family as the Pri Megadim and many others. So he wants to differentiate between Daled Kosos and the requirement of HeSeiba, where a person has what's called a Cheskas Chiv. In other words, status quo, when he gets to the Daled Kosos, is that he's obligated in that mitzvah Daled Kosos. And therefore, if he would drink the kosos without a HeSeiba, he has not fulfilled his chiyuv. It's as if he didn't drink it at all. And therefore, says the Baruch Tam, you have to drink all four kosos by HeSeiba. if he only drinks 2 out of the 4, he has not removed the cheskas chiyuv. So let's say a few words about chazaka. Chazaka creates a vadai, and a Safek cannot remove a chazaka. If you have a confrontation between a chazaka and a Safek, the Safek loses out to the chazaka. Why? Because the chazaka establishes a status quo, and the halacha determines that that status quo continues until we know for sure otherwise. So, for example, if the mikveh was checked and it has 40 saw, which is the shear of a mikveh, then we assume, unless we know absolutely otherwise, that the mikveh remains kosher. And if a tameh jumps into a mikveh, then the tameh has a cheskas tumah, and his status of tumah cannot be removed until we know for sure that he stepped into and dunked into a mikveh kshera to remove that status. And the Baruch Tam wants to apply that structure to the case of Daled Kosos. When I get to the first of the Daled Kosos, I must do HeSeiba because I have a cheskes chiyuv. There's no doubt, according to everyone, according to all the different views, that he has not fulfilled his obligation of drinking Daled Kosos HeSeiba until he drinks Daled Kosos HeSeiba. How many kosos? I don't know. Let's say 2 kosos. We don't know which 2. Now, at what point can we say that he definitely removed the cheskes chiyuv without a shadow of doubt? Only when he finishes the 4th kos. Because once he does all 4 kos HeSeiba, the mimanav shach, whether you accept the first view or the second view, whether it's the first set or the second set that requires HeSeiba, he has fulfilled his obligation. But until that point, when he finishes all 4 kos HeSeiba, we do not have a certainty that he fulfilled his obligation of kosos HeSeiba. And therefore the cheskas chiyuv kicks in, and the original status quo that he was obligated in HeSeiba during Daled Kosos remains untouched. And until he can undermine and completely and definitively contradict and uproot that cheskas chiyuv, the cheskas chiyuv is still alive and well, and generates an obligation to drink the HeSeiba. And that's going to happen and continue until he drinks all 4 kosos HeSeiba. How is this different than Megillah? In Megillah, the chiyuv is to read 1 day. Therefore, if you have a city that's a Safek, the very moment that they read the Megillah on the 14th, then the, shall I say, cheskas chiyuv has been undermined, has been removed, because you only need 1 day of Megillah reading. And if he read Megillah on the 14th, then the cheskas chiyuv is gone. What's left is a Safek, because maybe there's an obligation to read the Megillah on the 15th, and there we will apply the principle of Safek Rabbanan L'Kula. Why? Because once we get to the 15th, it's a Safek HaShakol, 50-50. We don't know if he's chayav, if he's not. There's no cheskas chiyuv, because he's already fulfilled 1 day's worth of Kriyas HaMegillah. And now we go on to number Daled, which is the Sharshei Hayam. And this is a commentary on the Rambam that was authored by Rav Rafal Yitzchak Meyer, who lived about 2 centuries ago. And in his commentary on Hilchos Ma'aser Sheni V'Neter Avai, he says that those cities that are in a state of Safek, it's very possible, and this is a major breakthrough, that even the Chachamim that established the takana of Megillah reading, even they themselves had a Safek. It's not that that a Safek was aroused or created at some later point in a specific city. No. There's a built-in Safek in the takana. Shelo yadu v'ayoros mesuyamos. They were unclear and uncertain about the status of those cities even at the time of the Takana. So let's say, for example, the Takana of Megillah reading was established at the time of Persia, at the time of Golus Paras and Achashverosh and Mordechai and Esther, etc. Well, what was the status when the Takana was made at that time of Persia? What was the status of these cities? The Chacham were asking themselves way back at the time of Yoshua, when Yoshua entered into the land. Were these walled cities at that time or not? So that Safek is not something that was created or was generated with the passage of time, but rather that Safek was inherent in the original Takana. We simply were unclear about the status of these cities when the Takana was made. Isbar hayolahem shebemeshach hashanim yiplu sfekos binyan zeh. They realized when they made the Takana that there are going to be many situations in which we will be in doubt about the status of the wall around the city, whether that wall dates back to the time of Yoshua in Cain. Since they knew when they made the Takana that there are cities that definitely have to read on Yudal, not wall. Cities that definitely have to read on Tesvav, they were wall. And then there are cities that, because of the nature of the Safek, would have to read on both Yudalad and Tesvav to cover the Safek. They should have had a third category of cities that will have to read the Megillah on both the 14th and the 15th. Umikach shalotiknu zos, but the bottom line is they did not make a takana, and it was never established that there are cities that have to read on both days. Muchach shatakana hamakoris oisa shegamayoris elu, that even those cities of Safek are included in one of the two formulated takanos of either the 14th or the 15th. And therefore, we're going to assume when we get to the first day, which is the first opportunity on the 14th, that they have to read on the 14th. And then we can apply Safek Rabbanan L'Kula on the second opportunity, which is on the 15th. And this is all because the issue that came up here with regard to those cities dates back to the time of the original Takana. Aval bi'arba kosos, harias Safek masha'amru chacham naflu etzleinu. Ume'ikar Takana lo haya amr lios b'Safek zeh. He's claiming that there shouldn't have been a Safek. We have a Safek. We're not sure what the Takana was. Was the Takana for the first two kosos requiring a HeSeiba, or for the second two kosos requiring a HeSeiba? In the original Takana, it was crystal clear. You know, it's like L'mashal L'mad Dover Dome, way back at the time of Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Tarfon, they knew even to wear tefillin of Rashi or tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam. We don't know which tefillin they wore. But it was known in its time. Here also, we don't know which of the kosos require a HeSeiba, but clearly when they established the mitzvah of a HeSeiba, Dalit Kos, they knew exactly which, and they formulated exactly which kosos would require a HeSeiba. We don't know. We lost the tradition or the transmission. We don't have the same opportunity to apply the logic that we apply to Megillah reading in a Safek situation, because there, since the Safek was built into the Takana, and yet the Rabbanan never established 2 days of Megillah reading for those cities of Safek, then obviously they left room to fulfill the Kriyas HaMegillah on the first day, and then apply Safek Rabbanan L'Kula on the second. But we don't have the luxury to say that in the case of Dalet Kosos. On the contrary, we have the exact opposite understanding of Daled Kosos, that there was a definite takana. We don't know what that takana was. We lost the transmission. We're not sure if it was the first or the second set of kosos. But the original takana was definite. And therefore, we cannot say that, well, there was never a takana to read, to drink on these two coasts, or a takana on those two coasts. We're always going to be in a situation of Safek, and therefore, misafek tzarich lahachmir lohasek b'kulon shal matzav kazeh lo tiknu shedai HeSeiba b'shtayim bilvad. There was never a takana that HeSeiba on 2 out of the 4 kosos would be sufficient. They never made such a takana because they were definite as to which of the 2 sets of kosos would require HeSeiba. They formulated that in a definite way. So again, in the case of the Ayaros, where there was a Safek way back when, then we can derive what we say mitoch lav atashmehem from the fact that they didn't make a takana requiring those cities to read on both days. It means that city or those cities only have to read on one day. But in the case of Arakosos, there was never a Safek inherent in the original takana. So we're left with just plain Safek. There's no way that you can medayek from the fact that they didn't say, do HeSeiba on these 2 coasts or those 2 coasts, that would have been sufficient. They left it to our understanding that one of these 2 sets of coasts definitely needs HeSeiba and the other does not. We're not sure about which one they had in mind when they made the takana. Therefore, the Ran is correct that if we would apply Safek L'Kul on both sets of Daled Kosos, we end up being Oker the takana. The takana, which we don't know what it is. So if you would leave out HeSeiba, let's say, for example, in the first 2 kosos, you're not sure whether or not you are violating the original takana. The same is true if you left out HeSeiba on the last 2 kosos. Whichever way you go, you're always wondering whether you were oker the takana by not doing HeSeiba on those 2 kosos. And now in number Hey, he quotes Toras Shashuai, which is not a sefer, it's actually an essay written by Rav Alter. If I'm not mistaken, his name was Chaim Alter, I'm not sure. But he says that let's look at the Gra. The Gra has Yerushalmi. And the Gra establishes in the name of the Yerushalmi that someone who lives in a city that was unwalled, he's called a paruz, and then he's oker di raso, and he moves to another city which is a walled city. Then even though he read the Megillah already on the 14th, because at that point he was a paruz, and now he becomes a ben krak because he moved and established his domicile in a city that's walled on the night of the 15th. He's going to have to read the Megillah a second time around for a second day. So again, I'm going to leave you with this quiz question. Is there a situation of someone who's obligated in 2 days of Megillah reading, b'toras vada? And it would be this scenario where he moved his dira from a paruz to a krak on the 15th of Adar. And he's obligated in 2 days of Megillah reading mitzad Vadai, not mitzad Safek. So the Yerushalmi says that a paruz ha'oker diraso lemukov, the leil tesvav, sarich likros shuv bit tesvav. We'll have to read it again on the 15th. So if a person realizes that his moving date is set to move to the big walled cities, he might want to avoid setting it on the night of the 15th, when he'll have to observe a second day of Purim. He says, Tama Poruz, she'eno kori b'tesvav, eno mishum shekvar kora esmo. If someone lives in an unwalled city, he's potter from Megillah on the 15th, and you would say, why? Because he already fulfilled his mitzvah on the 14th. He says, no, that's not so. And he's going to prove it to you. Shimkein gama oke di Russell lo yischayev shuv bekriya sheikara kvar biyom yudalit. If you're going to say that the reason why a porus is potter on tesvav is because he already fulfilled his obligation on yudalit, then Yerushalmi makes no sense. Because Yerushalmi is saying that despite the fact that you fulfilled your obligation on the 14th, you're still obligated when you move to the Krak to read it on the 15th. Ella hapturu. So why is a porus potter from tesvav? Mishum she'achshav b'tesvav porus. There was never an obligation imposed on a porus to read the Megillah on the 15th. The ilu yeh biyom zem mukaf, but if theoretically he could become a mukaf and lives in a walled city on the 15th, is be'emes yischayev. He would be chayev, as we saw in the Yerushalmi, to read again on the 15th. Okay, now this is a very sophisticated structure, very conceptual, very analytic, but how does it kick into our issue about HeSeiba on the 4 kosos? He says, Miyad b'shash shtiyas hakosos harishonos, krayeshna achra gam klapei hakosos achronos. So again, in the case of a city that's Safek walled, Safek not walled, when he reads the Megillah on the 14th, he has not really taken a stand on whether he's chayiv on the 15th, because Yerushalmi already broke new ground that you can be chayiv on the 14th and on the 15th. So the reading of the Megillah on the 14th has really no impact on the 15th. But in the case of Dalid Kosos, immediately when he drinks the first kos, or the first 2 kosos, kvar yeshno hachra. Why is that so? Where's the achra vis-a-vis the second set of kosos when he drinks on the first set. Sharei ein efshorus she is chayav gam b'shtayim rishonos gam b'shtayim achronos. Meaning he can't be chayav on all four, as we saw in the Gemara. Each one is a svar that excludes the other one. So therefore, once we're going to say to him, you have to do HeSeiba on the first two kosos, you've already been machriya the Safek that he's potur from HeSeiba in the last two kosos, because you've gone, each shita excludes the other shita. So you've accepted that first shita of the first set, and then you've rejected the shita of the second set. Again, we're not finished yet, but just to take a pause and make a cheshbon where we're holding now, the case of Daled Kosos is fundamentally different from that of the Safek Ayoros in Megillah reading, because in the Safek Ayoros, the fact that he reads on the 14th has no impact on the issue of the 15th. Because you could be chayav on both the 14th and the 15th, as we saw in the Yerushalmi, which is not the case in Daled Kosos. If you're obligated in the first two kosos, no way, no how, you could be obligated in the second two kosos. Again, I'm talking about HeSeiba, obviously. Nimtza she'im nechayvo b'HeSeiba b'shtayim rishonos b'zeh guf echranu shepotu mi HeSeiba b'achronos. So in Megillah reading, we can make a achra that he has to read on the 14th, and that has no impact on the 15th. But in Daled Kosos, if we make a achra that he has to drink on the first two kosos, that has an automatic impact on the second set of kosos, that he doesn't have to do HeSeiba on the second set of kosos. But then, what would be the logical reason why we would tell him that he's obligated on the first two kosos as opposed to the second two kosos? They're equally viable possibilities. And therefore, ein lahachmer b'shtayim harishonos yosem me'achronos. So let's see, what I would like to suggest here is we'll do it backwards, so to speak. We'll go from the bottom up. Let's take the case of Megillah reading. In the case of Megillah reading, when we're dealing with the issue on the 14th, whether this member of that Safek city is obligated Megillah or not, we're not going to say anything about the 15th. We don't know. You might be chayav in both. And how is that so? He could be a member of both cities. He could be a member of the Prozi city and have the status of a Prozi for Yudalit. He could be a member of the Mukaf city and have the status of a Ben Kraf. And that was Yerushalmi, right? So therefore, since we're not bound and compelled to decide about the 15th when we're trying to decide about the 14th, because they become two independent issues. One is he a Prozi on the 14th? And another issue, is he a Ben Krach on the 15th? So when we make the Achra, so to speak, and we decide that he has to read on the 14th, that has no impact on whether or not he has to read on the 15th. and therefore the Safek remains a Safek. So here we get to the punchline. If you have the page, we're going 3 lines up before the end of the right column in the text of the Otzer Hayunim. He says we can. In the case of Megillah, we cannot apply the principle of Safek Draman Lekula. She'im b'sheni lo yikra, if he doesn't read on the 15th, Harei vadai asa shelo kedin. So let's say we're dealing with the 14th, and we want to know whether he has to read the Megillah on that day. And that Safek has nothing to do with the 15th. The issue of the 15th remains independent. Again, in the case of Daled Kosos, if I am machriya the Safek that he's chayv on the first 2, then Memela I'm being machriya the Safek on the second 2 that he's not chayv. That's not true in the case of Megillah, because even if I was machriya the Safek on the first day of the 14th, that has no impact on the second day. That much we have. Now we have to figure out what's the repercussion. So being mechayev him to read the Megillah on the first of the 2 days, namely the 14th, does not in any way exempt him from reading the Megillah on the 15th, because he might be a ben mukaf at the time of the 15th. And even though we were mechayev him to read the Megillah on the 14th, he becomes chayev on the 15th. So when we deal with the 14th, it's independent of the 15th. So now we have to figure out, why is it definite that he has to read on the 14th? That's this line here. If we can only figure out this line, we came and she efshel lefes bezel lekula she'im b'sheni lo yikra. Everybody also shelo kidin. Does anybody have shot in that one line? That's what I can't figure out. That I understood. And he came when she have shalolechas bezelikula. She in b'sheni lo yikra. Arivade asa shelo kidin. What's this? Vadai asa shelo kidin. Now, if we're going to say that he doesn't read on the 14, then we're going to apply the same logic to the 15. And for sure, he also Shalok did, because then he didn't read the Megillah neither in the first or the second, the 14 or 15. So we have to be machmir and require him to read the Megillah on the 14th. Because if for whatever reason we're going to be making on the 14th, then that same reason he has to apply to the 15th. And then it's going to turn out that he never fulfilled his obligation of Megillah, not on the 14th or on the 15th. And that's Shalok Yedin. We're not sure which day he's chayav in, but he's definitely chayav in one of the two. And if he omits Megillah reading on both 2 days, he's definitely Shalok Yedin. So we cannot afford the luxury of being make on the first day, which will force us to apply the same logic and be make on the second day, because then he did Shalok Yedin. So he's going to have to read on the 14th. Now, once he reads on the 14th, then the question is, can he have the status of Ben Krach on the 15th, and he's obligated on the 15th? And here we don't know, and therefore we're going to apply the principle of Safek L'Kula. But now let's go back to the Daled Kosos. Let's say we want to be machmer on this on the first 2 Kosos. Then we're in a logical contradiction, because why choose the first 2 Kosos over the second 2 Kosos? See, in the case of Megillah, he could be chayav on both days. So we can't be make on the first day, because if that be the case, we'll be make on the second day, and then he for sure hasn't fulfilled this year. So that problem blocks the ability to say Safek Rabban L'Kula on the first day meaning 14. So let me just summarize what he's saying here, and let me ask the Olam if this is clear. There's a fundamental difference between the Safek of HeSeiba and Daled Kosos and the Safek of Kriyas HaMegillah of Prazi and Mukaf in a city we don't know its name. In the case of Daled Kosos, we cannot take a stand, which is called Hakras HaSafek, on the first set of Kosos without its implication vis-a-vis the second set of Kosos. Because by taking a stand vis-a-vis the first kosos, you've been mainly taking the opposite stand with regard to the second set of kosos. Because these two sets are mutually exclusive. Conceptually, either he's chayiv on the first two or the second two. Those are the two opinions. So based on that, we're going to have to be mechayiv him to be masive on all four kosos. Why? Because how can you take a stand on the first two kosos, which is antithetical to the second two kosos? Because the second two kosos are crying out that you did not fulfill your mitzvah on the first two kosos. So if you're going to be machmer on the first two kosos, then you're undermining the Safek on the second two kosos and claiming that you're not chayiv on the second two kosos, which we don't know. And again, it goes in both directions. On the other hand, in the case of Megillah, we could be machriya the first of the 2 days, Yudalid, without imposing and impinging on the second day, which is Tesvah. Because in the light of the Yushalmi, he could be chayiv on both days. Now we know he's going to have to be chayiv on one of those 2 days. So now if he goes ahead and reads the Megillah on the 14th, then we have a separate independent issue regarding the 15th, and here we can apply something to Rabbanan L'Kul. Okay. Now we're on the left column and we're up to the Beis HaLevi. This is, if you know, Rav Yoshe Ber Brisker, Rav Yossi Tov HaLevi Soloveitchik, my Rebbe's great-grandfather. Hochiach mi divrei Aran, shem ochal v'shasa kos achas o shtayim rishonos achronos lo HeSeiba, eino chayav lechol v'lishtos. So the Beis HaLevi wants to prove from the Ran that if, let's say, he went ahead and he chose to do HeSeiba on the first two kosos, or he chose the second two kosos, the Ran would say in such a case that he is potter from now on. Why? If you're going to tell me there's no tircha, that was the Ran's first explanation. It's certainly b'di'eved to force him to drink another set of kosos. That's going to be a tircha. Now let's go to the second explanation of the Ran. Te'oker atakon. He says, Shayach rak b'mokom sheboim likvoa es halocha. This is awfully similar to the Mishnah Melech, I think. He's saying that if we're being kover halacha, then we can't be kover one of the two sets and then be mevatel the other set. So that's as far as the kviyas hatakon is concerned. Ach b'makom sheb'mikra bilvad hischadish liyochid shelo hesiv. Ploni Almoni has a question because he wasn't Mason. Is bevadai lo shayach shete'oker atakona al yidei shehesiv rak b'shtei kosov lo b'kulam. So he says the following. If we're dealing with the issue of how the halacha is formulated, do we require HeSeiba on all four kosos? Then here we must take a stand according to the Ran that all four kosos chayv and HeSeiba, because if we're going to determine that one of the two sets is chayv HeSeiba, not the other, then you're being mevatel the mitzvah of HeSeiba, perhaps completely, vis-a-vis the other two kosos. But if we're talking about an individual who already drank the four kosos, but he left out HeSeiba, so we're no longer talking about Akiras HaTakana, we're talking about a Safek. He doesn't know. Did he fulfill the Takana? Did he not? Then we go back to the principle of Safek Davon L'Kud. Again, so far, honestly, I don't see the difference between the Beis Halevi and the Mishnah Lamelech. If we go back to Pei Hey for a moment, the previous Omud, number Aleph, the last paragraph. And he says, Kasher Safek hu b'takonos chachamim, that will be machmir. Because the other option is simply to omit HeSeiba in all four kosos. Honestly, I think that's exactly what it says here in the Beis Halevi. I mean, the fact that he has it as two separate paragraphs and presents it as two separate views implies that they're different one from the other. But maybe it'll become clear in the next paragraph. שמדברי הר"ן מוכח שהתקנה של שתיית ארבע כוסות היא רק לכתחילה ואינה מעכבת בדיעבד. שבתירוצו השני כוסף שיהיה אפשר לחס לכולה בספק זה שאם כן תעוקר התקנה לגמרי שלא יסב כלל. ואילו היה דין שהשוסה בלא HeSeiba צורך לחסה ולשתוס, אין מקום לדברו שתעוקר התקנה. So why do you say it's an Akiras HaTakana if you omit HeSeiba? That's not an Akiras Takana, because if he omits HeSeiba, will require that he go back and drink it again. שהאפשרות להקל קיימת רק בשתי כוסות ראשונות. שלאחר שבהן לא הסיב, הרי אינו יכול להקל ולא להסיב גם בשתי הכוסות האחרונות. Okay. So what I suggest now, I'm just looking at the clock. We don't have that much time, but I would like to discuss a little bit about Achilas Matzah. So perhaps we'll come back tomorrow to finish up with the Beis Halevi. But first, we want to ask the Kasha Tosfos. And that is, why don't we apply the principle, the logic of Maid Hava Hava, with regard to the second Kizayis Matzah. And not only that, but even with regard to the first Achilas Matzah, the first Kizayis, we have a problem, Maid Hava Hava. Why require HeSeiba when he's already fulfilled his mitzvah Sipritis Mitzrayim, and he made the bracha Gal Yisrael at the end of Magid? V'tirtzu sheyesh chiluk ben shtias kosos l'kezayis matzah. Mishum shematzah hi ikar seuda. Yosef miyayin. V'chol zman shenecheles tzorech laharos bo derech cherus. Again, if you may recall that we were wondering what's the connection here between Ikar HaSeuda and Derech Cherus. So that's going to be the piece on Harei Kedem, which I think, Steve, we sent out. Harei Kedem. Ubi Ofen Nosaf, Kosav, Shebiyayin Kvar HeSeiba B'shtei Kosa Rishonos. So that was the middle answer of Tosfos. Then in HeSeiba we apply my Dahava because he did fulfill the mitzvah HeSeiba on the first two kosov. You can't say that in the case of matzah. The Odom Rusha b'matzah kosov mefurish b'torah shezeichel leferish. So his people taken lach mitzad shenigalu. The afal pi shehi lechem oni yesh lo ochla b'derech cherus. So that's that double symbolism of matzah. So on the one hand, it's lechem oni, on the other hand, it's seichel cherus. But the pasuk says explicitly that the reason why we eat matzah is because lo hispik b'tzeikem lahach b'tzad shenigalu. So that's inherent in the very essence of the matzah, that we eat it to remind ourselves of the geula lo hispik b'tzeikem lahach b'tzad shenigalu. So the essence of matzah, even when we eat it after, post Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, we've already read the Magid, we finished with Kol Yisrael, we're going to eat the matzah. We are still in the mode of Derech Cherus and Geula because that's the essence of the matzah, and therefore it requires a HeSeiba. In this Tafku, at Tosfos, Ketzad Adin Shelo Ochal Matzah B'lo HeSeiba. Does he have to repeat his achilus matzah if he omitted HeSeiba? O shema yotzi dei chovasa chovashtia v'achila aflo as sheis. So it seems that we're going to have a whole discussion here about why does Tosfos vacillate about someone who ate matzah without HeSeiba, is he required to eat matzah a second time? And on Thursday, we had a whole discussion whether or not the requirement to repeat the achilus matzah, if you hold it like that sheet in Tosfos, in order to achieve HeSeiba, is that an essential part of the mitzvah of matzah, or it's a separate kiyum of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? That was our discussion on Thursday. Okay then, so let me say Shavua Tov, and B'li Neder will pick this up tomorrow.